The applause was a physical thing, a wave of pressure that washed over Alara Vale, pressing the air from her lungs. It was not for her. It was for Marcus, standing on the brightly lit stage, accepting the Pritzker Medal for the Obsidian Tower, a building that had been born in the quiet hours of her own mind. He held the gleaming award aloft, his smile a masterpiece of practiced humility, a lie sculpted in white teeth and ambition. From her corner table in the cavernous ballroom, she watched the performance. She felt nothing. That was the most terrifying part. The rage had burned out months ago, leaving behind a fine gray ash that coated everything. Now there was only the quiet exhaustion of long-term suffering. She wore an emerald gown, a slash of defiant color in the monochromatic sea of black tie attire. It was a dress she had bought for a celebration that never came, for a victory that had been stolen from her. The fabric was smooth against her skin, a silent armor. She kept her posture perfect, a habit drilled into her by years of enduring. To slouch was to admit defeat. To weep was to give him a satisfaction he had not earned. So she sat, a perfect porcelain doll of composure, and watched her soul's work be credited to the man who had broken it. Marcus had not designed the Obsidian Tower. He had not sketched the initial concept on a cocktail napkin, as the legend he so carefully curated now claimed. He did not spend sleepless nights wrestling with the complex physics of its cantilevered sky garden. He did not understand the way the light was meant to fall through the atrium at dawn, a phenomenon she had calculated to the millimeter, a private daily miracle for the building's inhabitants. Marcus understood contracts. He understood handshakes and threats whispered over expensive scotch. He understood how to take a thing of beauty and stamp his name on it. He was a branding expert, and she had been his finest product. The kind of silence that had descended on her life after she left him, and his firm, was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of deep water, the kind that crushed. He had made sure of it. The calls stopped. The offers vanished. Her portfolio, which should have been her passport to any firm in the world, was suddenly radioactive. He had not updated the file on her in his mind. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. The quiet, brilliant girl he'd plucked from obscurity, the one who should have been grateful for the scraps of recognition he threw her way. He could not comprehend that she had left not for more money or a better title, but for the simple, desperate need to breathe her own air. When the ceremony concluded, the wave of applause receded, leaving behind the chatter of the industry's elite. Alara remained seated, nursing a glass of water, letting the crowd thin. She needed to disappear before he came looking for his trophy. Not the medal, but her. He would want to see her face, to search for the cracks in her composure, to confirm his victory. She rose, her movements fluid and deliberate, and made for the glass doors that led to the terrace overlooking the city. The cool night air was a balm. Below, the city was a tapestry of light, a testament to dreams built of steel and glass. One of those lights, the brightest beacon on the skyline, was hers, the Obsidian Tower. It speared the clouds, a monument to her uncredited genius. She felt a phantom ache in her hands, the memory of the pencil, the endless hours of drafting. There you are. His voice was a shard of ice down her spine. Marcus. He moved to block her path, his body a wall of expensive tailoring and unearned confidence. He had the medal in his hand, swinging it lightly from its ribbon. "Quite a party," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I was hoping I'd see you. To celebrate. Our success." "Your success, Marcus," she replied, her voice steady, a minor miracle. "Congratulations." "Don't be like that, Ilara. You're being childish." He stepped closer, invading her space. The scent of his cologne, a cloying mix of sandalwood and entitlement, filled her senses. "You have an obligation to be here, to support the firm." "I no longer work for the firm." "A temporary arrangement?" He dismissed with a wave of his hand. "I've been patient. I've given you time to get over your little tantrum. It's time to come back. We have the Helios project to start. She thought about the Helios project, the files she had left on her server, another city-defining vision he was no doubt preparing to claim. The thought was so tiring it almost broke her. No. The word, quiet as it was, changed the air between them. His smile tightened. It was the face she remembered from the end, the one that appeared when the mask of the charming visionary slipped. What did you say? No, she repeated, a little stronger this time. I will not be coming back. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Don't be absurd. Where else would you go? I made you. I can just as easily unmake you. He gestured vaguely at the glittering skyline. No one in this city will touch you without my blessing. Then I'll find another city. His face darkened. The performance was over. This was the real Marcus. Vain, arrogant, and prone to a rage that was as swift as it was petty. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the delicate fabric of her gown, bruising the skin beneath. You are not listening to me, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. You are mine. Your talent, your ideas, they belong to me. You signed a contract. Let go of my arm, Marcus. Her voice was dangerously calm. She did not scream. She would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. You will come back, he snarled, pulling her closer. You will stand by my side, and you will smile, and you will be grateful. You owe me. The pressure on her arm was immense. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her control. The terrace, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, now felt like a cage. The distant chatter of the party seemed a universe away. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. A sound cut through the tension. It was not loud. It was the soft, deliberate clink of a crystal glass being set down on a marble-topped table just a few feet away, in the deeper shadows of the terrace. It was a sound so out of place in the violence of the moment that it made both of them freeze. A figure detached itself from the darkness. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. He moved with an unhurried grace that was more intimidating than any overt threat. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply arrived. The man stopped beside the small table and looked at them. His face was calm, his eyes dark and impossibly still. All the energy, all the kinetic violence of Marcus's rage seemed to drain out of the air, pulled into the gravity of this man's silence. Marcus's grip on her arm faltered. The man's gaze was not on Marcus. It was on Ilara. It was a look of quiet, unnerving assessment, as if he were cataloging every detail of the situation in a fraction of a second. He noted the white-knuckled grip on her arm, the defiant terror in her eyes, the architectural precision of her posture even under duress. Then his eyes shifted to Marcus. He did not speak. He simply looked. It was the kind of look that communicated a complete and total understanding of a man's character, his weaknesses, his pathetic, hollow core. Marcus, for the first time, seemed to realize who he was looking at. A flicker of recognition, then fear, crossed his face. Mr. Kwan, he stammered, his hand falling away from Ilara's arm as if it had been burned. We were just talking. Julian Kwan's expression did not change. His stillness was absolute. The conversations on the other side of the glass doors seemed to have stopped. The music had halted. A sudden, heavy silence had fallen over the entire event, as if the world itself was holding its breath. All eyes, it seemed, were now turned toward the drama unfolding on the terrace. You are mistaken, Julian Kwan said. His voice was low, a quiet baritone with the resonant quality of a cello. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. You were threatening my architect. The words hung in the cold night air. My architect. Marcus paled. I don't understand. She used to work for me. A temporary arrangement, Julian Kwan said, echoing Marcus's own dismissive words back at him. The effect was devastating. He took a single deliberate step forward. He was not a large man, but he possessed a density, a structural power that made him seem to fill the entire space. "She works for me now." Two men in identical dark suits materialized behind him, their movements economical and silent. They had not been there a second ago. They simply were. They flanked Marcus, their presence a silent promise of efficient, emotionless action. "I think you should leave," Julian said. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of inevitable outcome. Marcus stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The predator had become the prey in the space of a heartbeat. His entire universe, built on bluff and bluster, had just collided with a star. "But the award—" "The award for the Obsidian Tower," Julian clarified, his voice dropping even lower. "The flagship property of the Choreo Development Fund. My fund. Your firm was a contractor, Mr. Vance." "A temporary one." He paused, letting the words settle like stones. "Security." It was the same word Marcus might have used, but it sounded different coming from him. It was a final judgment. The two men took Marcus by the arms. There was no struggle. All the fight had gone out of him. His arrogance had collapsed, leaving a whimpering, terrified man in its place. He was removed without a sound, disappearing back into the party and then out of it, his public humiliation swift and absolute. The terrace was silent again. It was just Ilara and Julian Kwan. The city lights glittered below them, indifferent. Ilara's arm throbbed where Marcus had gripped it. She wrapped her other hand around it, a gesture of self-comfort. She was trembling, the adrenaline finally hitting her system. Julian Kwan did not move closer. He gave her space, his stillness a respectful boundary. "Are you all right, Miss Vale?" he asked. She could only nod, the word trapped in her throat. He gestured to a private lounge area just off the terrace, its doors held open by one of his silent attendants. "Please, come inside." The lounge was an oasis of quiet luxury. Soundproofed walls, soft lighting, and a view of the skyline that was even more breathtaking than from the terrace. Another of his assistants, a man with a calm, professional demeanor, brought her a glass of water. His name, she would learn, was Mr. Kim. He was already on his phone, his voice a low, efficient murmur as he began the systematic process of dismantling Marcus Vance's life. Ilara sat on a plush velvet sofa, the cold glass of water a welcome anchor in the spinning chaos of her thoughts. Julian Kwan took a seat in an armchair opposite her, maintaining a polite distance. He watched her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "You know my name," she stated, her voice a little shaky. "I do," he confirmed. "I have made it a point to. I have followed your career since the Callaway exhibition at university. Your design for a self-sustaining library was revolutionary, far superior to the winning entry." She stared at him. The Callaway exhibition. That was a decade ago. She had placed second. Marcus had won. It was the first time he had taken credit for an idea that was fundamentally hers, an idea they had developed together but which he had presented as his own. "You were there?" "I was one of the judges," he said simply. "My vote was for you. I was overruled." The information was so startling, so completely unexpected, that it took her a moment to process. He had seen her. Even then, a decade ago, when she was just a student full of impossible ideas, someone had seen the truth of her work. "The Obsidian Tower," he continued, his gaze drifting to the window where the building itself stood sentinel. "When the initial proposal from Vance Holdings came across my desk, it was adequate, competent, but it lacked a soul. Then, the revised designs were submitted. Your designs. They were not just competent, they were poetry. I knew they were yours. The signature was unmistakable." He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate. She thought of Marcus, of his arrogant blindness. And then she looked at this man, Julian Kwan, who had been working from the original file all along. He had seen the metadata. He knew the author. "He told everyone it was his," she whispered, the admission costing her more than she expected. "Men like Marcus Vance do not create." Julian said, his voice devoid of judgment, a simple statement of fact. They acquire, they brand, they consume, but they do not build. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding hers. I do not invest in contractors, Miss Vale. I invest in architects, visionaries, which is why I am dissolving my partnership with Vance Holdings and offering you a contract to establish and lead a new architectural division within Quan Industries. It was not a question. It was a pronouncement. You will have an unlimited budget, a full staff of your choosing, complete creative autonomy. Your first project will be the Phoenix Initiative, the complete redevelopment of the city's south waterfront. He paused. You will also have our full legal resources at your disposal to ensure any and all intellectual property you created while at his firm is returned to its rightful owner. And you will have my personal security team to ensure your safety. You will be safe. The words washed over her. Unlimited budget, creative autonomy. The Phoenix Initiative, the most ambitious urban renewal project in a generation, and safety. The simple, profound promise of safety. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, handed to her in a quiet room by a man who was practically a stranger, a man who moved with the silent, tectonic power of a continent shifting. For a week, Alara lived in a state of suspended disbelief. She was moved into a penthouse apartment in a building owned by Quan Industries. It was a space of minimalist elegance, concrete floors, vast windows, and a breathtaking emptiness that she found both calming and daunting. It was a blank canvas. Her security detail was a quiet, constant presence. A black car was always waiting, her driver a stoic man named Han. Mr. Kim, Julian's impossibly efficient assistant, handled everything. Her resignation from Marcus's firm was formalized, her belongings retrieved, and a series of legal injunctions were filed that effectively froze Marcus out of her life. She spent the first few days in the quiet of the apartment, processing the violent, jarring shift in her reality. Part of her was terrified. She had just escaped one powerful man only to place herself in the care of another, infinitely more powerful one. She felt a deep, instinctual fear of dependency, the muscle memory of her time with Marcus screaming at her to run. He had also promised her the world in the beginning. His promises had turned into chains. But Julian Quan was not Marcus Vance. He did not call. He did not crowd her. He gave her space. He sent her files, not demands, but information. Blueprints for the office space that would become her division's headquarters, with a simple note attached, for your approval and modification. Financial projections for the Phoenix Initiative. Urban planning surveys. He was not handling her. He was equipping her. On the 8th day, she went to the Quan Industries Tower. It was a sleek, imposing structure of black glass and steel that dwarfed even the obsidian tower. Her new office was a corner suite on the 81st floor, an entire wing still raw and unfinished, waiting for her direction. Julian was there, standing with Mr. Kim, looking over a set of plans. He turned as she entered, his gaze as calm and assessing as it had been on the terrace. Miss Vale, I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. They are more than satisfactory, Mr. Quan, she said, her voice firm. She had rehearsed this. She needed to set the terms, to establish that she was not a damsel in distress, not a project to be managed. I appreciate everything you've done. The apartment, the security. It's a great deal. But I need to be very clear about something. He inclined his head, his full attention on her. Mr. Kim discreetly faded into the background. I am an architect. I will be your chief architect. I am not a victim. I don't need saving. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city below. She expected him to be offended, perhaps to retract the offer. Instead, the corner of his mouth tilted in the barest suggestion of a smile. It was the first time she had seen even a hint of warmth in his stoic expression, and it was startlingly effective. I know, he said, his voice soft. He took a step closer, his eyes holding hers. The intensity was back, but it wasn't threatening. It was something else. something that looked almost like relief. "I have no interest in saving you, Miss Vale. I need you to save me." The statement was so profoundly unexpected it left her speechless. Him? The quiet sovereign of this corporate empire, a man who could ruin another with a single word, needed saving. He seemed to understand her confusion. He gestured around the vast, empty space. "I build things. I acquire things. I manage assets and mitigate risk. My world is made of numbers and contracts and leveraging power. It is efficient, and it is empty." He looked back at her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a deep, abiding loneliness in his eyes, a weariness that his perfect suits and unflappable demeanor could not entirely conceal. "You see the world differently. You see the poetry in the steel. You see how light falls. You create spaces that have a soul. I can build an empire, Miss Vale, but I cannot give it a heart. That is a form of architecture beyond my skill set." He paused. "I don't need to save you from Marcus Vance. He is an insect. I am asking you to save this company, and perhaps myself, from a world without beauty. I need your vision." And with that, he completely reframed their relationship. It was not rescuer and victim. It was not employer and employee. It was a partnership. He was offering her not just a job, but a purpose that was equal to his own. He provided the foundation. She would provide the soul. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw past the immense power and the rumors of his connections to the Korean underworld. She saw a man who recognized a similar isolation in her, a man who understood what it was to be supremely competent, yet fundamentally alone. "All right, Mr. Kwan," she said, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "Let's get to work." The weeks that followed were a blur of intense, exhilarating work. Ilara threw herself into designing the new division's headquarters, transforming the raw space into a studio that was both beautiful and brutally efficient. It was a collaborative, open-concept space designed to foster creativity, the antithesis of the stuffy, hierarchical firm Marcus ran. She hired a team of the brightest young architects she could find, many of whom had also been stifled or overlooked by the industry's old guard. She was building not just an office, but a culture. Julian was a constant, quiet presence. He did not meddle, he observed. He would appear in her studio late at night, when she was the only one left, lost in her work. He would bring her tea or a light meal, setting it down on the edge of her drafting table without a word, and simply watch her work. He listened with an unnerving stillness as she spoke about her ideas, her passion for sustainable materials, for public green spaces, for buildings that served the communities they inhabited. He never praised her with empty superlatives. His validation was quieter, deeper. He would ask a precise question that showed he had not only heard her words, but understood their deepest implications. "If we use the reclaimed timber for the facade," he might ask, his voice a low murmur in the quiet studio, "what is the long-term maintenance protocol? How do we ensure its beauty endures for a century, not just a decade?" She found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone. She told him about her childhood, sketching impossible houses in the margins of her notebooks. She told him about the crushing disappointment of the Callaway exhibition. She told him about the 1,000 tiny ways Marcus had chipped away at her confidence, making her believe she needed him to translate her vision into reality. In return, he offered small, carefully chosen pieces of himself. He spoke of his grandfather, a master carpenter who fled North Korea with nothing but his tools, and who taught him that the strength of a structure is in its joints, the unseen points of connection. He spoke of the immense weight of his family's legacy, the obligation to build upon what they had created, to protect his people. He never explicitly mentioned the Mafia boss rumors, but she began to understand the source of his quiet ruthlessness. His power was not for his own ego. It was a shield for those he was responsible for. Their relationship developed in these quiet moments, a slow burn built on mutual recognition. It was not a romance of grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was a partnership forged in late-night conversations over blueprints, a shared meal in a silent boardroom overlooking the city, the comfortable silence of two people who understood the language of structure and stress, both in buildings and in people. While Ilara was building her new world, Julian was systematically unmaking Marcus's. He did it with the quiet, devastating precision of a controlled demolition. Mr. Kim would provide Ilara with brief, understated updates. Vance Holdings lost the municipal contract for the new city hall today, he might mention while handing her a coffee. The primary investor pulled out. We bought his shares. Or, Mr. Vance's top 3 structural engineers submitted their resignations this morning. They will be starting with us on Monday. Julian was not just beating Marcus, he was acquiring him piece by piece. He bought out Marcus's creditors. He poached his key talent. He absorbed his contracts. He was not destroying Vance Holdings. He was consuming it, assimilating its valuable parts into his own empire and leaving the empty husk for Marcus to preside over. It was a strategy of breathtaking ruthlessness, executed without a single raised voice. Marcus, predictably, was blind to the true nature of the assault. Blinded by an arrogance so profound it bordered on a clinical delusion, he believed this was all a negotiating tactic. He saw Ilara's departure and Julian's actions not as a final judgment, but as an elaborate power play to force him into a more favorable partnership. He could not conceive of a world in which he was not the main character. He sent Ilara emails, alternating between pathetic pleas and veiled threats. Give her 3 days, he'd boasted to a colleague, a conversation that was, of course, recorded and transcribed for Julian's morning briefing. She'll be begging to come back. She can't create without me. His fatal miscalculation came in the form of a lawsuit. Desperate and bleeding money, Marcus filed a multi-million-dollar suit against Ilara, claiming she had stolen proprietary designs, the very designs for the Obsidian Tower and the nascent Helios project. It was a classic Marcus move, an act of public aggression designed to intimidate and humiliate her back into submission. He arranged for a process server to deliver the summons at the most public, most damaging moment possible. The trap was set, but Marcus had no idea he was the one walking into it. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Phoenix Initiative was a major event. The mayor was there, along with city council members, industry titans, and a horde of press. It was held on a crisp autumn day at the site of the future development, a vast, derelict stretch of the city's southern waterfront. A large stage had been erected with a backdrop displaying a stunning rendering of Ilara's vision, a series of elegant, interconnected buildings woven together with parks and public plazas, all powered by sustainable energy. It was more than a development. It was a new heart for the city. Ilara stood beside Julian on the stage, feeling a sense of calm pride she had not thought possible just a few months ago. She wore a tailored white dress, an architecturally precise garment that was both professional and beautiful. She was introduced not as an employee, but as the visionary behind the project. As she stepped to the podium to speak, she felt Julian's hand briefly, supportively on the small of her back. It was a small gesture, but it grounded her. She spoke eloquently about her vision, about creating a community, not just a collection of buildings. The crowd was captivated. This was her moment, the public reclamation of her voice and her talent. It was then that Marcus chose to strike. A commotion erupted at the edge of the press corps. Marcus Vance, looking disheveled and frantic, pushed his way through the barrier, a process server trailing in his wake. "This is a sham!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at Ilara. "She's a fraud! A thief!" The crowd gasped. Cameras swiveled to capture the drama. Security began to move in, but Julian held up a hand, a quiet, almost imperceptible gesture. He wanted this to play out. Marcus stormed toward the stage, waving a sheaf of papers. "She stole my designs! The Phoenix Initiative, the Obsidian Tower, it's all my intellectual property. I have a lawsuit here. You are being served, Ilara." He looked manic, his expensive suit rumpled, his face slick with sweat. He was a man coming apart at the seams. He used words like obligation, my work. You owe me. He was still working from the old file, the one where she was his possession, his asset. Alara did not flinch. She watched him, not with fear, but with a kind of detached pity. He looked so small, so hollow. The process server, a nervous-looking young man, tried to approach the stage, but one of Julian's security guards blocked his path with an immovable presence. Marcus continued to rave. "She has nothing without me! Ask her! She's nothing!" Julian stepped forward. He did not go to Marcus. He walked calmly to the podium, taking the microphone from its stand. He did not raise his voice. The chaotic shouting from Marcus only served to amplify the profound, unnerving calm of Julian's own voice. "Thank you, Mr. Vance, for that passionate interruption," he began, his tone laced with a dry, Arctic irony. The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. "You raise an interesting point about intellectual property and ownership. It's a subject I've taken a great interest in recently." He turned slightly, and Mr. Kim, who had appeared at his side, handed him a tablet. Julian held it up. The screen was visible on the large displays flanking the stage. It showed a series of legal documents, signatures, and wire transfer confirmations. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," Julian announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "Kwon Industries completed its acquisition of a controlling interest in First National Mercantile Bank, the primary lender for Vance Holdings." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Marcus froze mid-rant, his mouth hanging open. "Furthermore," Julian continued, swiping the screen to a new page, "we have also acquired the majority stakes in both Omni Steel and Apex Construction, your two largest material suppliers and project partners. As you failed to meet your payment obligations to them and, by extension, now to us, your contracts have been terminated." The color drained from Marcus's face. He was beginning to understand. This was not a negotiation. It was an execution. "And finally," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than any shout, "the lawsuit you are attempting to file. It's a fascinating document. It claims ownership of all designs produced by your firm." He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes cold and dark. "As we are now the sole creditor and majority stakeholder of your bankrupt and valueless company, all assets of Vance Holdings, including any and all intellectual property you foolishly believe you own, are now the legal property of Kwon Industries." He swiped the screen one last time. A single, final document appeared. The official transfer of assets. "The matter is closed." The world collapsed for Marcus Vance. It happened in seconds. The financial, social, and professional structure of his life was not just cracked, it was vaporized. The arrogant confidence, the swagger, the performative power, it all dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, broken man. He dropped to his knees on the damp ground. A terrible, guttural sound escaped his throat, a sob of utter despair. "No," he whimpered, the word barely audible. "No, please." He looked up at Julian, his face a mask of pathetic, begging horror. "Please, I'll do anything." Julian looked down at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was not gloating. He was not angry. He was simply finished. He had identified a flaw in the structure and he had removed it. Mostly. He gave a small nod. The security team moved in. They lifted the sobbing, incoherent Marcus to his feet and dragged him away, his expensive shoes scuffing in the dirt. He was no longer a rival or a threat. He was just a piece of debris being cleared from the construction site. A profound silence hung over the event. The press, the politicians, the power players, they had just witnessed a public execution of a man's entire existence, carried out with the surgical precision of a corporate takeover. Julian turned back to the crowd, his composure absolute. He gestured for Ilara to rejoin him at the podium. She moved as if in a dream, her legs unsteady. He placed a steadying hand on her arm, his touch warm and solid. "My apologies for the interruption," he said to the stunned audience. "Now, where were we?" Yes, vision." He looked at Ilara and his expression softened. For the first time, in front of hundreds of people, he smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face. Before he was so rudely interrupted, Julian said, his voice now filled with a warmth and pride that was unmistakable. Mr. Vance was shouting about the true author of the Obsidian Tower. For once, he was about to stumble upon the truth. He gestured to the main screen behind them. The rendering of the Phoenix Initiative dissolved, replaced by a series of scanned images. Ilara's original hand-drawn sketches of the Obsidian Tower. They were dated, her elegant signature clear in the bottom corner. They were followed by her initial digital models, her structural calculations, her notes on the light studies. It was an undeniable, irrefutable chronicle of creation. "Some of you may know Miss Vale as a former associate of Vance Holdings," Julian announced, his voice ringing with authority. "This is an error that needs correction. For the past 5 years, she has been the most capable person in every room she has entered, and her vision has been the silent engine behind the most significant architectural achievements in this city." He turned his gaze fully on her. "I would like to reintroduce you to Ilara Vale. She is not my employee. She is my partner, and she is the chief architect and guiding visionary for the Phoenix Initiative and all future developments of Quan Industries." He began to applaud, not the polite, rhythmic applause from before, but a strong, genuine ovation, and the crowd, after a moment of stunned silence, joined him. The sound washed over Ilara, but this time it did not feel like pressure. It felt like light. It felt like recognition. It felt like justice. It was for her. Later that evening, they stood on the highest floor of the Quan Industries Tower. It was not an office, but a quiet, private space Julian referred to as his observatory. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city's glittering expanse. The 4th wall was a library filled with old books on history, philosophy, and, surprisingly, poetry. They stood together in a comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below them. The lights of the Obsidian Tower shone brightly, a diamond in the dark velvet of the night. It no longer looked like a monument to her stolen work. It looked like a stepping stone, a beginning. "Is it done?" she asked softly, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. "It is handled," he replied. Mr. Kim had already processed the final details. Marcus Vance had signed over everything in exchange for Julian not pressing criminal charges for corporate fraud. He was left with nothing. Not even his name held any value. He had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in the world they inhabited. Ilara let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 5 years. It was a slow exhale, a release of tension from muscles she didn't even know were clenched. The weight of his presence in her life, a constant low-grade pressure, was finally, completely gone. A real smile touched her lips, reaching her eyes and staying there. For the first time in a very long time, she felt a sense of profound and unshakable peace, a sense of rightness. "Thank you," she said, turning to look at him. "There is nothing to thank me for," he said, his gaze serious. "I was protecting my most valuable asset." He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the old fear of being seen as a possession. He corrected himself immediately. "My most valuable partner." She accepted the correction with a small nod. "Still, thank you." He reached out and took her hand. His was warm, his grip firm but gentle. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of connection. An anchor. "I told you, Ilara. I need you to save me." "From a world without beauty?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "From a world where everything is a transaction," he clarified. "Where every action is weighed for its strategic value. Where trust is a liability." He looked out at the city. "My grandfather built things with his hands, solid things, beautiful things. I build empires on paper and in code. It's less tangible, less real." He squeezed her hand. "You make things real." She understood. He lived in a world of abstract power, of unseen forces and silent, ruthless maneuvers. She lived in a world of light and shadow, of texture and form, of creating tangible spaces for human lives. They were two halves of a whole. He built the foundation so deep and so strong that no one could ever shake it. She built the spires that reached for the sky. "The Phoenix Initiative," she said, looking toward the dark patch of land on the waterfront. "The demolition starts next week." "Our initiative," he corrected her gently. "Our initiative," she agreed, the word feeling natural, right. "I want to incorporate a public library into the main plaza. A real one. With books." He smiled that rare, genuine smile again. "Self-sustaining?" "Of course," she said. "And this time, we'll make sure the right person gets the credit." They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, looking out over the city they were about to reshape together. The future was not a fairy tale promise of happily ever after. It was something far more real and far more valuable. It was a blueprint. It was a shared vision, a partnership of equals, a family built not on obligation or convenience, but on honesty, on complication, and on the daily, deliberate choice to build something beautiful and enduring, together. It was the promise of what comes next.